The manor was too quiet. Astoria had taken the noise with her. Draco Malfoy sat in the dark study. He didn't light the fire. He didn't turn on the lamps. The darkness was easier to sit in than the light. Light meant he had to look at the empty chairs. It meant he had to look at the dust motes hanging in the air where she used to walk. Upstairs, his son was asleep. Or he was pretending to be asleep. Draco didn't know how to tell the difference anymore. He rubbed the heavy silver signet ring on his left hand. The metal was cold. Earlier that evening, they had eaten dinner at the long table. Scorpius had sat at the far end. Draco had sat at the head. They hadn't spoken. The clinking of silver forks against porcelain plates had been the loudest sound in the room. Scorpius had pushed his peas around his plate, kept his eyes on the tablecloth, and asked to be excused. Draco had let him go. He always let him go. He didn't know how to make him stay. He leaned forward in the heavy leather chair and opened the bottom drawer of his desk. He wasn't looking for anything specific. He just wanted to touch something she had touched. His fingers brushed against a false wooden bottom. Draco paused. He pressed his hand flat against the wood. A weak, fading pulse of magic answered him. Astoria's magic. He pushed his magic against it, just a little. The false bottom popped up with a quiet click. Beneath it was a stack of thick parchment envelopes. Draco pulled them out. The paper was smooth. The edges were crisp. They were tied together with a dark green ribbon. Her handwriting was across the top envelope. To Draco. His hands shook. He untied the ribbon. He broke the wax seal. Draco, if you are reading this, I am gone. And if you are reading this, you are probably sitting in the dark, blaming yourself for how quiet the house is. He stopped breathing. It was exactly what he was doing. You love Scorpius more than you know how to say. But you are both so incredibly stubborn. You hide when you hurt. He hides when he hurts. If I leave you two alone, you will build separate castles in the same house and never speak. Draco traced her handwriting with his thumb. The ink was dry. The letters were perfectly formed. I will not let that happen. So I did something you are going to hate. He frowned. Astoria rarely did things he hated. She was the diplomat. She was the one who smoothed the edges of his temper. I hired someone. You need a mediator. Someone who won't be scared of you. Someone who won't let you retreat into your cold, dark corners. Someone who knows exactly how to handle a stubborn Malfoy. I prepaid her. I bound the contract with magic. You cannot fire her. You cannot break it. You have to let her help you. It is my final request. Let her in, Draco. For Scorpius. I love you. Astoria. Draco stared at the signature. He read it 3 times. A mediator. She had hired a family mediator. Who on earth could she have hired that wouldn't be terrified of walking into Malfoy Manor? He reached for the second envelope. It was thicker. It had a heavy, official ministry seal on the back. The seal of the Department of Family Affairs. He broke it open. The parchment unfolded. It was a formal contract. Glowing golden runes ran along the borders, proving the magical binding was active. Astoria had locked this in tight. He scanned down to the signature line. Client, Astoria Greengrass Malfoy. Mediator, Hermione J. Granger. Draco dropped the parchment on the desk. Granger. No. Absolutely not. He stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the wooden floor. He paced across the dark study. Granger. The Golden Girl. The Savior. The last person on Earth he wanted analyzing his failures as a father. Astoria had lost her mind in those final weeks. That was the only explanation. The flue in the corner of the study suddenly roared to life. Green flames shot up into the dark chimney. The sudden bright light made Draco squint. He stopped pacing. He turned toward the fireplace, rubbing his signet ring hard. A figure stepped out of the green fire. She wore practical dark trousers and a thick, honey-colored knit jumper. Her wild curls were tied back in a messy knot, but several pieces had already escaped. She carried a heavy leather briefcase in one hand and a silver thermos in the other. Hermione Granger brushed a spot of soot off her sleeve. She looked up. She didn't look surprised to find him standing in the dark. She didn't look intimidated by the shadows of the manor. She just looked at him with warm, professional brown eyes. "Malfoy," she said. Her voice was perfectly steady. Draco didn't say anything. He let the silence hang in the air. It was his best weapon. People usually broke when he stayed quiet. They nervously filled the gap with words, and then he dismissed them. Granger didn't crumble. She set her briefcase down on the stone hearth. "You're in the dark." She noted. "I prefer it," Draco said. His voice was clipped. "Cold. It's terrible for your eyes." She replied easily. She unscrewed the lid of her thermos. The smell of Earl Grey tea and honey drifted into the cold study. Draco crossed his arms. "You are trespassing." "I am arriving for my scheduled appointment." "I didn't ask for a mediator, Granger. I asked for quiet." She poured tea into the small metal lid. "Actually, you didn't ask for anything. Your wife did." Draco's back went completely rigid. The mention of Astoria in this room, from her mouth, felt like a physical strike. "Leave," he said. The word was a sharp command. Granger took a sip of her tea. She didn't flinch. She didn't step back toward the flue. She simply set the cup down on the mantelpiece and opened her briefcase. "I can't do that," she said, pulling out a thick file of notes. "We have a contract. I am the head of this house. I am firing you." Granger pulled out a duplicate of the contract he had just read. She walked across the room and dropped it directly onto his desk, right next to Astoria's letter. "You can glare all you want, Malfoy. I've already unpacked my notes." She tapped the golden runes glowing along the edge of the parchment. "It's an unbreakable, magically binding agreement. Specifically designed by Astoria to prevent you from doing exactly what you are trying to do right now." Draco glared at her. He opened his mouth to yell. He raised a hand to point her back to the flue. But he looked at the contract. He looked at Astoria's signature. He couldn't break it. If he found a loophole, it would mean betraying Astoria's final wish. He couldn't do it. He rubbed his ring again. The metal was warming up under his thumb. "Why you?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Of all the people she could have hired. "Because she knew I wouldn't let you intimidate me." Granger answered simply. Draco hated how right Astoria was. A small sound broke the standoff. Draco snapped his head toward the study door. The heavy oak door was pushed open just a few inches. Standing in the gap was Scorpius. He was wearing his dark green pajamas. He held a small stuffed dragon in one hand. He looked small. Too small for this massive, empty house. Draco froze. He didn't know what to say. Scorpius, he started, but the words died in his throat. Go back to bed? What are you doing up? Nothing felt right. Scorpius didn't look at his father. He looked past him. He looked straight at Granger. Granger turned. Her professional posture instantly softened. The sharp edge of the mediator vanished, replaced by an overwhelming, gentle warmth. She didn't walk toward the boy. She just smiled. Hello, Scorpius, she said softly. Scorpius blinked his large grey eyes. He didn't run away. He didn't hide behind the door like he normally did when strangers came to the manor. He stepped 1 foot further into the room. Draco watched the exchange, completely silent. Scorpius hadn't stepped toward a new person in months. I brought the puzzle you liked. Granger told the boy. The one with the moving stars. Scorpius gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Granger looked back at Draco. The challenge was gone from her eyes. Only steady resolve remained. She knew exactly what she had just won. Draco couldn't throw her out now. Not when Scorpius was looking at her like she was a lifeline. She picked up her thermos. She took a sip from it, entirely unbothered by the cold of the manor, and looked at him. Tuesday at 4, Malfoy. Don't be late to your own sitting room. Part 2. The assessment. Hermione Granger was not easily intimidated. She had fought in a war. She had faced down dark lords, broken into impenetrable vaults, and stood firm against the most terrifying politicians in the ministry. But walking into the formal sitting room of Malfoy Manor on a Tuesday afternoon made her stomach knot into a tight, uncomfortable ball. She was terrified of failing Astoria. Astoria Malfoy had been a force of quiet, devastating nature. When she had walked into Hermione's small, sunlit London office 3 months ago, she was already dying. The curse in her blood had made her skin translucent, paper-thin, and yet she had sat in the velvet armchair across from Hermione with the posture of a queen. She hadn't asked for pity. She had asked for a contract. They are going to drown without me, Astoria had said. She had sipped her Earl Grey tea from a delicate china cup, her hands perfectly steady even as the tea trembled slightly. Draco will turn into ice. He thinks being cold protects the people around him. And Scorpius. Scorpius will turn into a ghost. He will learn to be quiet so he doesn't upset his father. I need you to break the ice. I'm a mediator, Astoria. Hermione had protested gently. I handle custody disputes and magical emancipation. I don't. I can't force a grieving man to feel things. I don't need you to force him to feel. He already feels too much. I need you to force him to stay in the room. I need you to be the immovable object when he tries to be the unstoppable force. Hermione took a deep breath, inhaling the faint scent of lavender and old parchment that lingered in the manor, and pushed the memory aside. She was here to do a job. She was here to be the immovable object. She knelt on the plush, intricately woven Persian rug in the center of the sitting room. The room itself was beautiful, but it felt entirely unlived in. High ceilings, towering windows letting in grey afternoon light, and heavy velvet curtains that looked like they hadn't been drawn back in months. She opened her leather briefcase. She didn't pull out diagnostic notes, magical behavior charts, or psychological evaluations. She pulled out a large, heavily carved wooden puzzle. Scorpius sat 3 feet away. He was watching her. He hadn't spoken a single word since she arrived 20 minutes ago. He was wearing perfectly pressed, miniature dark green robes, looking exactly like a tiny, tragic aristocratic doll. He hadn't played with any of the toys lined up neatly on the shelves. He had just watched her unpack. "This one has moving stars," Hermione said. Her voice was steady, practiced, and warm. "But only if you get the border right first." She dumped the pieces onto the rug. They scattered with a satisfying, wooden clatter. Scorpius didn't move. His large grey eyes, so painfully identical to his father's, tracked a piece that slid toward his knee. "I'm going to start on the left corner," Hermione offered. She didn't push. She didn't ask him how he was feeling. She didn't ask if he wanted to play. Kids like Scorpius didn't want to talk about their feelings with strangers. They just wanted someone to sit in the quiet with them until the quiet didn't feel so heavy and suffocating. She picked up a dark blue edge piece, turning it over in her hands. A shadow shifted in the doorway. Hermione didn't look up. She didn't need to. She could feel the sudden, sharp drop in the room's ambient temperature. The magic in the air suddenly felt constrained, defensive. Draco Malfoy was hovering. He was standing just outside the doorway of the sitting room. He wore a crisp black suit, meticulous and severe, looking every inch the untouchable heir to an ancient fortune. But his knuckles were white where he gripped the doorframe, betraying the rigid control he was attempting to project. Hermione snapped a second puzzle piece into place. It made a sharp click. "You're hovering, Malfoy." "I am observing," Draco corrected immediately. His voice was clipped. It carried the exact same defensive, freezing chill as it had the other night in the study. "You're looming," Hermione said calmly. She reached for a piece near Scorpius's knee, keeping her movements slow and predictable. "It's distracting. Either come in or leave." "This is my house, Granger. I don't need your permission to stand in my own doorway. I am the mediator." She didn't look up from the wooden board. "This is a designated session space. You are currently disrupting the designated session space." Draco scoffed. The sound was harsh, echoing slightly in the vast room. "You are playing with a wooden toy on the floor. Don't dress it up as ministry-approved therapy. It's an assessment tool." Hermione corrected smoothly. She finally lifted her head and looked at him. "And it requires participation, which you are currently avoiding." Draco's jaw set into a hard, unforgiving line. He rubbed the heavy silver signet ring on his left hand. The movement was fast, almost frantic, his thumb catching on the engraved crest before he caught himself and dropped his hand to his side. "I have work to do." "No, you don't." Draco narrowed his eyes. The silver in them flashed dangerously, a warning sign that would have sent most ministry employees running for the flu network. "Excuse me?" Hermione sat back on her heels. She rested her hands on her knees and met his glare evenly. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. You don't have work to do. I pulled your public schedule from the ministry registry this morning. You cleared your entire afternoon calendar for the next 6 months. You transferred all your immediate portfolio management to your proxies. You have absolutely nothing to do right now except stand in that hallway and panic. Draco froze. The silence stretched. It was thick, heavy, and extremely volatile. A lesser person would have apologized. A lesser person would have backed down, intimidated by the sheer, cold fury radiating from the man in the doorway. Hermione traced the edge of a wooden star piece, feeling the painted grooves, and waited. You are a menace, Granger. Draco said softly. The words were laced with venom, but the venom was thin. It was a defense mechanism. A wall built out of habit, because he didn't know what else to do. I'm a mediator. Hermione replied, her tone completely unfazed. The difference is merely paperwork. Sit down. Draco didn't move. He looked like he wanted to turn around, walk directly into the flue, and disappear into the safety of his dark study. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, completely terrified of the drop, gripping the rock face to keep from falling. Hermione almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But Astoria had hired her to break the ice, not to coddle it. She was about to prompt him again, to push a little harder against his defensive shell, when a small, sudden movement stopped her. Scorpius reached out. His tiny, pale hand hovered over the scattered puzzle pieces. He picked up a piece with a silver crescent moon painted on it. He didn't look at Hermione. He didn't look at his father in the doorway. He just extended his arm. He pointed a single, small finger at the empty space on the woven rug directly next to him. It was a silent command. Hermione held her breath. She didn't dare move. Draco looked at the empty spot on the rug. He looked at his son's extended finger. The fight drained out of him so fast it was almost painful to watch. The rigid, aristocratic posture crumbled, just a fraction, the tension bleeding out of his shoulders as he realized he was trapped. He couldn't say no to his son. Draco stepped into the room. He walked stiffly across the sitting room, his footsteps muffled by the thick rug. His expensive, meticulously tailored black suit looked entirely out of place as he lowered himself down. He sat next to Scorpius. The distance between them was still too wide, at least a foot of empty space remained, but they were on the same level. They were in the same room. Hermione didn't smile. A smile would spook him. She kept her face completely neutral as she slid a pile of unassembled pieces toward the middle of the board. The edges first, she instructed simply. Draco studied the wooden pieces like they were a complex, dangerous curse he had been asked to dismantle. He looked entirely lost. He was a man who commanded boardrooms, managed vast international estates, and navigated the treacherous waters of pureblood politics, and he looked terrified of a children's puzzle. Scorpius held out the crescent moon piece. He held it right in front of Draco. Draco looked at the small hand. He hesitated. Then, slowly, with agonizing care, he reached out. His large, pale fingers brushed lightly against Scorpius's as he took the piece. "Thank you," Draco said. His voice was barely a whisper. It was rough. Unused. It sounded like a man who hadn't spoken properly in months. Scorpius didn't answer, but he picked up another piece and focused entirely on the board in front of him. Hermione went back to the left corner. She let the silence settle over the room. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the dark study from the other night. It was a working silence. It was the sound of 3 people breathing in the same space, focusing on the same task. They worked for 10 minutes. Draco was utterly awful at it. He kept trying to force pieces together based purely on their geometric shape rather than the magical enchantments painted on them. He was increasingly frustrated, and he was trying very, very hard to hide it behind a mask of bored indifference. "You have to look at the stars," Hermione pointed out quietly, tapping a piece he had just discarded. "The constellations have to align. Otherwise, it won't move." Draco shot her a dark, irritated look. "I know how constellations work, Granger. My family is named after them." "Then apply the knowledge, Malfoy. Stop trying to shove a piece of Orion into Ursa Minor just because the peg happens to fit." He snapped a piece into place. It didn't fit. A small, dull spark of blue magic pushed the piece back out, rejecting his placement. Draco sighed. It was a long, tired sound that seemed to pull from the very bottom of his lungs. Scorpius reached over. He picked up the piece his father had just tried to force. He turned it exactly 90 degrees to the right. He set it down gently. It clicked into place seamlessly. A tiny, glowing silver star flared to life on the wood, casting a faint glow over the boy's pale hands. Draco stopped. He looked at the glowing star. He looked at Scorpius. "Right." Draco murmured. 90 degrees. "I see." Scorpius didn't look up, but his shoulders relaxed. The rigid, tiny aristocratic dull posture softened. He leaned forward, searching the pile for the next piece, no longer holding himself completely stiff. Hermione traced the rim of her thermos, which sat forgotten on the rug beside her. She watched the 2 of them. They were broken. They were both carrying a grief so large it eclipsed the entire manor, threatening to pull them both under. But they were sitting on the floor. Draco picked up another piece. He didn't try to force it this time. He looked at the painted stars. He looked at how they aligned with the pieces Scorpius had already placed. He didn't look at her, but as he handed Scorpius a puzzle piece, the rigid line of his shoulders finally dropped. It was a start. Part 3. The ghost the manor gardens was sprawling, meticulously manicured, and overwhelmingly green. Draco Malfoy stood by the heavy glass doors of the drawing room, watching them. He held a crystal tumbler of Ogden's fire whiskey that he hadn't actually tasted in 20 minutes. The glass was sweating in his palm, the condensation dampening his skin. Out on the lawn, near the ornate white stone fountain, were Scorpius and Granger. It had been 4 weeks since she had first stepped out of his flu and dropped Astoria's magically bound contract on his desk. 4 weeks of Tuesday and Thursday afternoon sessions. 4 weeks of Hermione Granger slowly, persistently dismantling the suffocating silence of the manor. Draco was feeling territorial. He didn't like the way Scorpius looked at the grandfather clock on Tuesdays. He didn't like how his son's tiny, rigid shoulders relaxed the second she walked into a room. And he particularly didn't like how incredibly easy it was for Granger to coax a nod, or even a rare, fleeting smile, from a boy Draco hadn't been able to properly reach in months. It made him feel like a massive failure. It made him feel entirely inadequate as a father. Every time she made Scorpius smile, it was a glaring reminder of his own inability to do the same. Through the thick glass, he watched Granger point toward the far edge of the lawn. One of the albino peacocks was strutting along the blooming rose bushes, its tail feathers fanning out in a brilliant display of white. Scorpius was standing directly next to her, clutching the sleeve of her practical, maroon knit jumper. He wasn't hiding behind her. He was just holding on. It was a gesture of trust. Draco set his glass down on the side table with a sharp clink. The sound echoed loudly in the empty drawing room. He pushed the heavy glass doors open and stepped out into the afternoon sun. The air was crisp, carrying the strong scent of damp earth and blooming white roses. Draco walked down the stone path, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his dark trousers. He didn't rush, but he moved with deliberate, heavy purpose. He was going out there to assert himself, to remind them both that he was the parent, to reclaim the territory he felt he was losing. Granger heard his footsteps on the gravel. She turned. Her wild curls were blowing around her face in the light afternoon breeze. She reached up to push a stray lock behind her ear, her brown eyes completely devoid of the usual fear people showed when Draco approached them with a scowl. "Malfoy," she greeted. Her tone was easy, familiar, entirely unimpressed by his looming presence. "Granger," Draco replied smoothly. He stopped a few feet away, making sure his physical presence took up enough space to be felt. "I see you've migrated the session outdoors. Fresh air is highly recommended in developmental literature," she said. She didn't sound defensive. She just stated it as a matter of fact. And Scorpius wanted to see the peacocks. Draco looked down at his son. Scorpius immediately let go of Granger's jumper. The boy took a half step back, folding his hands behind his back in a perfect, miniature imitation of Draco's own defensive, aristocratic posture. Draco hated it. He hated that his presence made Scorpius instantly withdraw into a shell. "They are particularly active today," Draco offered. It sounded incredibly stiff. He was trying to bridge the gap, but the words felt like heavy lead in his mouth. Scorpius gave a tiny nod. He didn't look at his father. "Astoria told me they were fiercely protective of this side of the garden," Hermione said quietly. Draco flinched. The name hit him like a physical blow to the ribs. He rubbed his silver signet ring, his jaw tightening automatically. People didn't talk about Astoria in front of him. His friends, his proxies, the manor elves, they all treated her name like a dark curse that would shatter him if spoken aloud. They tiptoed around her memory, leaving him alone with the crushing weight of it. He waited for the pity. He waited for Granger's face to soften into that awful, condescending look of sympathy that made him want to hex people across the room. The pity never came. Hermione didn't look at him like he was a fragile piece of glass. She just watched the white peacock strutting proudly by the roses. "She told me how much she loved sitting on that stone bench over there," Hermione continued, pointing to a weathered bench sitting under the shade of a large oak tree. "She said it was the best place to watch Scorpius learn to walk. She said you used to chase him around the fountain until you were both completely out of breath." Draco froze. The memory hit him with staggering, devastating force. The bright afternoon sun, the sound of Astoria laughing from that exact bench, the feeling of a very small, very unsteady Scorpius crashing into his legs and giggling uncontrollably. It felt like it had happened to a completely different man in a different lifetime. A man who knew how to smile. "She said that?" Draco asked. His voice was rough. He hadn't meant to speak, but the words forced themselves out past the tight lump in his throat. "She did," Hermione said. She turned to look at him. Her eyes were warm, but entirely factual, relaying the information like a critical piece of evidence. She told me she loved how fiercely you protected the people you consider yours. She said you were the most devoted man she had ever met, and that she knew you would be exactly what Scorpius needed once you remembered how. Draco stopped breathing. He didn't know what to do with that information. He was drowning in guilt every single day because he couldn't reach his son, and yet Astoria, even at the very bitter end, had believed he was entirely capable. She hadn't hired Granger because she thought Draco was broken beyond repair. She had hired Granger to remind him how to work. A knot in the very center of his chest, a knot that had been pulled painfully tight for an entire year, suddenly loosened. He looked at Granger. Really looked at her. She wasn't trying to replace Astoria. She wasn't trying to take over his role as a parent. She was simply acting as a bridge, holding the pieces together until Draco was strong enough to carry them himself. "Thank you," Draco said softly. The words were genuine. "Bear." Hermione offered a small, genuine smile. Not a professional mediator smile. A real one. It completely transformed her face, softening the sharp edges of her fierce intelligence and making her look incredibly, dangerously beautiful in the afternoon light. Draco's pulse did something highly irregular in his wrist. He quickly looked away, focusing entirely on the green grass near his expensive shoes, unnerved by the sudden shift in his own chest. "Look," Scorpius whispered. It was the first word the boy had spoken aloud in Draco's presence in an entire week. Draco snapped his head down. Scorpius was pointing at the ground near the rose bushes. The white peacock had dropped a feather. It lay on the short grass, pristine and slightly iridescent in the afternoon sunlight. Scorpius walked forward. He picked up the long white feather. He held it carefully in his small hands, examining the delicate barbs with intense concentration. Then, very slowly, Scorpius turned around. He walked back toward Draco. Draco held his breath. He didn't move a single muscle. He didn't want to break the fragile spell hanging over the garden. He was terrified of doing something wrong, of making a sudden movement and sending his son retreating back behind his thick walls. Scorpius stopped right in front of him. The boy held out the feather, presenting it directly to his father. Draco reached out with a slightly trembling hand. He took the feather gently from his son's grasp. "Thank you, Scorpius. It's brilliant." Scorpius didn't nod. He just pointed a small, decisive finger at Hermione. "Give it to her," Scorpius said quietly. Draco blinked. He looked at the feather in his hand, and then he looked at Hermione. She was watching them, a look of deep, quiet victory shining in her brown eyes. She wasn't victorious over Draco. She was victorious for him. Draco cleared his throat, pushing down the overwhelming swell of emotion. He stepped toward Hermione. "My son commands it," Draco said dryly. The banter was a shield, but it was a much lighter shield than he usually employed. He held out the pristine white feather. Hermione reached out to take it. As she stepped forward on the slightly uneven garden stones, her heel caught sharply on a sunken paver. She pitched forward, a sudden gasp escaping her lips as gravity took hold. Draco didn't think. Instinct completely took over. He dropped the feather. He lunged forward. His hands caught her firmly by the waist just before she hit the ground. The impact knocked the breath out of him. He pulled her flush against his chest, stabilizing them both in a sudden, jarring stop. For one agonizingly long second, the entire world simply stopped moving. Hermione's hands were planted firmly against his solid chest. He could feel the rapid, startled thumping of her heart through the thin layers of his cotton shirt and her wool jumper. His own hands were spread wide across her waist, feeling the soft, yielding curve of her hips. She smelled like vanilla and rain and something completely, dangerously warm. Draco looked down. Hermione looked up. Their faces were inches apart. Her lips were parted slightly in shock. Her brown eyes were wide, completely unguarded, searching his face. The air between them suddenly felt incredibly heavy. Highly charged. The tension wasn't hostile anymore. It was pulling, drawing him in, making him fiercely, painfully aware of exactly how long it had been since he had held someone. Since someone had felt soft against him. He almost closed the distance. The urge to pull her closer was so sudden, so violent, it terrified him. Panic flared hot and bright in Draco's chest. Guilt hit him like a bucket of ice water. He was holding another woman. He was holding her in Astoria's garden, just feet away from Astoria's favorite bench. He stepped back. He pulled his hands away from her waist instantly, as if the contact had burned him. Hermione stumbled slightly as he let go so abruptly, but she quickly righted herself. She smoothed down her jumper, her face flushing a deep, sudden crimson. Draco's hands were burning where they had rested on her waist. He clenched his fists at his sides, trying to chase away the phantom sensation of her skin beneath the wool, but the heat refused to fade. He cleared his throat. He looked at the white fountain. He looked at the rose bushes. He looked anywhere but her eyes. "We should head inside," Draco said. His voice was clipped again. The coldness was back in full force. The drawbridge was pulling up, locking him safely inside his fortress of grief. He turned around and started walking briskly back toward the heavy glass doors of the drawing room. He didn't wait to see if she was following. He didn't want to see the confusion or the hurt on her face. He just needed to get away from the heat. Part 4. The storm Hermione Granger hated being ignored. It had been exactly 14 days since the incident in the garden. For 2 entire weeks, Draco Malfoy had been a ghost in his own home. He was never in the formal sitting room when she arrived for her Tuesday sessions. He was never in the grand hallway when she left on Thursdays. He was never lingering in the study. He was entirely, deliberately absent. He was running. Hermione sat on the edge of a velvet armchair in the massive, cavernous library of Malfoy Manor. The room was dark, lit only by the flickering orange glow of the fireplace and the occasional, violent flash of lightning outside. A severe summer thunderstorm was currently raging across Wiltshire. The rain was lashing against the tall, arched glass windows with aggressive, punishing force. The thunder was shaking the heavy stone floors beneath her boots. 20 minutes ago, the storm had completely knocked out the Manor's flu connection to the Ministry network. The green flames in the grate had sputtered and died, leaving only normal, non-magical fire behind. Hermione was officially stranded. She wasn't entirely upset about it. She looked over at the dark green velvet sofa near the fire. Scorpius was fast asleep. He was curled into a small, tight ball, clutching a worn leather copy of the Tales of Beedle the Bard firmly against his chest. The heavy, rhythmic sound of the rain had made him drowsy, and the steady, radiating warmth of the fire had finally pulled him under. He looked incredibly peaceful. The tight, Anxious lines that usually framed his small face were completely gone. Hermione closed her thick file of session notes. She set it softly on the carved mahogany coffee table, careful not to make a sound. She knew Draco would come. He might be actively avoiding her, but he wouldn't avoid his son. Not when the thunder was this loud. Not when he knew Scorpius hated the dark. Astoria's detailed letters had been very clear about how fiercely Draco guarded the boy during severe weather. Hermione didn't have to wait long. The heavy oak double doors of the library pushed open with a quiet, highly controlled click. Draco stepped into the room. He was wearing tailored dark trousers and a simple white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His pale blonde hair was slightly damp, as if he had been standing out on one of the covered stone balconies watching the storm roll in. He didn't see her at first. His eyes were locked entirely on the velvet sofa. He walked across the dark library. His footsteps were completely silent on the thick Persian rugs. He reached the edge of the sofa and looked down at his sleeping son. His rigid, aristocratic posture instantly softened, melting away into something fiercely protective and gentle. He reached out and carefully pulled a heavy woven blanket over Scorpius's small shoulders. Hermione stood up from the armchair in the corner. Draco whipped his head around. He stiffened fractionally as he caught sight of her standing in the dim, flickering light of the fire. "Granger," he whispered. His voice was sharp, but tightly constrained by the absolute necessity of keeping it low. "What are you still doing here? Your scheduled session ended an hour ago." Hermione walked toward him. She kept her footsteps just as silent. She didn't stop until she was standing on the other side of the mahogany coffee table, only a few feet away from him. "The flu network is down," she whispered back. Her tone was calm, completely factual. "The storm knocked out the local magical grid. I can't leave until the ministry restores the connection." Draco's jaw tightened. He looked at the fire. He looked at the heavy rain lashing against the windows. He looked at the spines of the ancient books lining the walls. He looked anywhere but at her face. "I will have a manor elf prepare a guest room in the east wing," he said softly. He started to turn away, his movements stiff. "I'm going to take Scorpius upstairs to his room." "No, you aren't." Draco stopped dead. He turned back slowly. The silver in his eyes flashed dangerously in the firelight. "Excuse me?" "He's deeply asleep," Hermione pointed out, gesturing smoothly to the boy on the sofa. "If you pick him up and move him now, he will wake up. He's exhausted, Malfoy. He had a very difficult breakthrough today. Let him sleep. He is my son. I will sleep in his room with him. You're running," she said. The blunt accusation hung in the dark, heavy air between them, ringing louder than the thunder outside. Draco stepped around the coffee table. He closed the remaining distance between them until they were standing less than 2 feet apart. He was using his height, towering over her, trying to intimidate her into backing down and dropping the subject. Hermione didn't step back. She tilted her chin up and held his gaze with unwavering resolve. "I am not running, Granger," he hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low register that vibrated in the quiet room. "I am managing my household. You haven't been in the same room as me for 14 days. Hermione countered evenly. She kept her voice just as low, forcing him to lean in slightly to hear her over the rolling thunder. "You cancelled the joint progress meeting on Friday. You sent a silent proxy to sign the session renewals. You are actively hiding in the West Wing. I have been busy with estate matters. You cleared your schedule for 6 months. We already established that fact. Draco glared at her. You are incredibly infuriating. Do you know that? It's a professional requirement, Hermione replied without missing a single beat. Another massive crack of thunder shook the library walls. Scorpius stirred on the sofa, letting out a small, unhappy murmur in his sleep. Without thinking, both Draco and Hermione moved at the exact same time. They both reached out to settle the thick blanket back over the boy's shoulders. Their hands collided in the dark space above Scorpius. Hermione's bare fingers brushed firmly against Draco's knuckles. His skin was freezing cold. Hers was incredibly, vitally warm. Draco ripped his hand back as if he had just touched a highly volatile live wire. He took a fast, panicked step away from the sofa, putting immediate distance between them. His breathing hitched, a sharp, uneven sound cutting through the quiet room. Hermione slowly pulled her hand back. She looked at him. He was standing near the towering bookshelves, gripping the edge of a heavy reading table so hard his knuckles were stark white. He looked completely cornered. He looked terrified. Why did you run? Hermione asked softly. I didn't run, he lied again, his voice tight. Malfoy. She took a deliberate step toward him. You caught me when I tripped in the garden. You made absolutely sure I didn't get hurt. And then you looked at me like I was a dangerous curse and you fled the grounds. Why? Drop it, Granger. I'm your mediator. I don't drop things. It's literally my job to pick things up and force you to look at them. She took another step closer, entering his personal space. Did I offend you? Did I overstep some archaic pureblood boundary? Did you think I was going to read something completely inappropriate into it? I said, drop it. You can't just shut down every single time something unexpected happens. Hermione pressed, her voice urgent but still locked in a fierce, protective whisper. Scorpius needs you present. He needs you to be able to handle physical contact without flinching. If you panic every time someone gets too close to you, you are going to teach him to do the exact same thing. I am not teaching him to panic. Draco snapped, his voice rising dangerously before he forcefully shoved it back down into a harsh whisper. Then explain it to me. Hermione whispered back fiercely. She stopped right in front of him. They were standing chest to chest in the shadows of the library. Explain why you looked at me like you hated me the second after you saved me from falling. Draco stared down at her. The warm firelight flickered across his pale, sharp features. His chest was rising and falling rapidly under his white shirt. He looked like a man fighting a massive, violent internal war, completely torn between the deeply ingrained instinct to flee and the desperate, terrifying urge to stay exactly where he was. He didn't hate her. Hermione knew that. She was smart enough to know that. She had seen the raw, unguarded look in his eyes right before he had let her go in the garden. She had felt the frantic, heavy thumping of his heart against her palms. I wasn't angry, Draco finally whispered. The words sounded like they were being dragged out of his throat against his will. Then what were you? Hermione asked. Her voice was incredibly soft now. Draco closed his eyes. He let go of the heavy reading table. He brought his hands up and rubbed his face, a gesture of absolute, bone-deep exhaustion. When he opened his eyes again, All the icy defenses were completely gone. There was no Malfoy arrogance. There was no territorial posturing. There was only the raw, devastating truth. I was terrified. Draco confessed into the dark space between them. Hermione frowned slightly, her mind working quickly to analyze the shift. Terrified of what? That Astoria would be angry? No. Draco shook his head slowly. He looked down at his hands, at the heavy silver signet ring that bound him to a past he couldn't change. Astoria told me to let you in. She knew exactly what she was doing. She always knew what she was doing. She wouldn't be angry. Then why? Hermione asked, her own heart hammering a rapid rhythm against her ribs. Draco looked back up. His grey eyes locked onto hers with intense, completely unguarded focus. The silence between them felt infinitely heavier than the raging storm outside. It was thick with words that hadn't been spoken, with grief that hadn't been fully processed, and with a sudden, overwhelming heat that had absolutely no business being in a mediator session. He took a half step closer. The small distance between them vanished entirely. Hermione had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. She could feel the solid heat radiating off his chest. She could smell the crisp scent of rain and expensive cedar soap clinging to his shirt. He didn't touch her. He just stood there, towering over her in the dark, letting his absolute presence wash over her. I didn't run because I was angry, Granger. Draco whispered, his voice a dark, rough velvet in the quiet library. Hermione couldn't look away. She couldn't breathe. He looks down at her. His eyes are entirely silver in the dark. I didn't let you fall, Granger. But if I hadn't let you go, I don't think I would have stopped holding you. Part 5. The contract expires. The heavy silver clock on the mantelpiece ticked. It was a sharp, methodical, unforgiving sound. Draco Malfoy hated it. He sat at the large, heavily carved mahogany desk in his private study. The thick velvet curtains were drawn completely back, letting the harsh, bright midday sun flood into the room. He didn't want the light. He wanted the dark. But the dark was where he used to hide, and he wasn't allowed to hide anymore. She had taken that away from him. He looked at the leather-bound calendar sitting on the corner of his desk. 6 months. It had been exactly 6 months since Astoria's magically bound contract had forcibly activated. 6 months of Tuesday and Thursday afternoon sessions. 6 months of Hermione Granger invading his home, aggressively pushing his boundaries, and stubbornly forcing him to remember how to breathe. Today was Thursday. It was the final day. Draco picked up a heavy, silver-plated quill. He dipped it carefully into a crystal pot of black ink. Sitting in the exact center of his immaculate, highly organized desk was the Ministry of Magic Completion form. It was a single piece of thick, official parchment. It legally and magically terminated the services of the Department of Family Affairs mediator. It officially severed Granger's tie to the Malfoy estate. He set the quill down. He was absolutely terrified of the suffocating silence returning to the halls. He was terrified of waking up tomorrow morning and knowing that the flu wasn't going to flare green at exactly 4 o'clock. But more than anything, more than the grief or the quiet, he dreaded how desperately he wished he could ask her to stay. He had absolutely no right to ask. Astoria had paid for exactly 6 months. Granger was a ministry professional. She had fulfilled a binding, complex magical contract. She had systematically fixed the broken, freezing dynamic between a grieving father and his silent, traumatized son. She had done her job perfectly. To ask for more would be incredibly selfish. It would be a massive betrayal of the boundaries they had so carefully, meticulously maintained since that explosive night in the library during the thunderstorm. Since that night, they hadn't touched. They had barely even stood in the same half of a room. Draco had forcefully retreated behind a thick, impenetrable wall of pure-blood formality, and Granger had let him. She hadn't pushed. It was safer this way. The heavy oak door to the study slowly creaked open. Draco looked up, his mask instantly sliding into place. It wasn't Granger. It was Mippy, the head manor elf. Mippy wrung her small, wrinkled hands violently in her pristine tea towel uniform. "Master Malfoy, sir. Mippy is very sorry to interrupt your work." "What is it, Mippy?" Draco asked, his voice completely flat. "It is young Master Scorpius, sir. He is refusing to come out of his room. He has magically locked the heavy door." Draco closed his eyes for a long, heavy second. He rubbed the silver signet ring on his left hand. The metal felt cold against his skin. Of course Scorpius had locked the door. Scorpius knew exactly what today was. The boy had been meticulously tracking the days on his own small calendar in the nursery. Scorpius was fiercely intelligent, and he knew that today was the day the magic officially ran out. Today was the day she stopped coming. "Leave him," Draco said quietly. "Do not attempt to force the door." "But Miss Granger will be arriving in 10 minutes, sir." "I know," Draco said. His voice was cold. It was the exact voice he used when he was managing hostile boardrooms and ruthlessly cutting down financial rivals. "I will handle Miss Granger." Mippy bowed deeply, her large ears drooping, and vanished with a quiet pop. Draco stood up. He walked slowly over to the grand fireplace. He checked the time on the mantel clock. 4 minutes until 4 o'clock. He straightened his expensive black suit jacket. He pulled the stiff cuffs of his crisp white shirt down so they rested perfectly against his wrists. He locked every single emotion he possessed into a small, iron box in the very back of his mind. He couldn't afford to crack today. If he cracked, he would beg her to stay. He would ruin everything. At exactly 4 o'clock, the flue roared to life. Green flames shot up the dark chimney, illuminating the entire study in a harsh, emerald light. Hermione Granger stepped out of the fire. She wasn't wearing her usual practical knit jumpers or comfortable trousers. Today, she wore a sharp, highly tailored navy blue skirt suit. Her wild curls were pinned back aggressively into a severe, professional knot at the base of her neck. She looked exactly like a high-ranking ministry official arriving to formally close a complicated case file. She looked entirely untouchable. "Malfoy," she greeted. Her tone was brisk, supremely efficient. "Granger," Draco replied smoothly. He didn't move from his spot by the mantelpiece. He kept his hands clasped firmly behind his back to hide any tremor. She brushed a tiny, almost invisible speck of soot off her pristine navy sleeve. She looked around the study. Her brown eyes swept analytically over the leather chairs, the tall bookshelves, and finally, the heavy mahogany desk. "Where is Scorpius?" she asked, pulling a sleek black leather folder from her briefcase. "We usually start in the sitting room." "He is in his room," Draco stated simply. "He will not be joining us for the final session." Hermione stopped. She looked up from her folder. Her severe professional mask slipped, just a tiny fraction, revealing genuine concern. What do you mean he won't be joining us? We have a final assessment protocol to complete. He has locked his door. He firmly refuses to come down. Draco kept his voice entirely devoid of any human inflection. He knows it is your last day. He is actively choosing not to say goodbye. Hermione frowned. It was a deep, genuine frown that completely marred her carefully constructed professional appearance. Malfoy, you can't just let him hide up there. He desperately needs closure. We need to explain the transition to him properly so he doesn't feel abandoned. I am not going to drag my son down here against his will to participate in a minister-mandated goodbye. Draco's words were clipped, sharp as broken glass. He is processing the end of the contract in his own way. It's not just a contract to him. Hermione argued, her voice rising slightly, echoing in the large room. She dropped the black folder forcefully onto his desk. I am not just a piece of parchment. He has built a secure, healthy attachment. You can't let him sever it by hiding behind a locked door. The attachment was temporary, Draco said. He forced the brutal lie out of his mouth. It tasted exactly like ash. It was always explicitly designed to be temporary. Hermione watched him in complete silence. The silence in the study was suddenly deafening. It wasn't the working, highly comfortable silence they had carefully built over the last 6 months. It was the heavy, suffocating, intensely hostile silence of the very first day. Draco walked purposefully over to his desk. He picked up the ministry completion form he had just signed. He held it out to her, his arm completely rigid. You have successfully fulfilled the terms, Granger, Draco said. His voice was a flat, cold, aristocratic drawl. The Malfoy estate thanks you for your service. Hermione didn't take the parchment. She looked at the official document in his extended hand. She looked at his crisp, tailored suit. She looked at the perfectly blank, perfectly arrogant pureblood mask he had plastered tightly over his face. The warmth completely drained out of her brown eyes. Is that all I am to you, Malfoy? She asked. Her voice was barely more than a whisper, but it cut through the room like a physical blade. A fulfilled term? Draco couldn't breathe. The iron box in his mind was rattling dangerously, threatening to completely break apart. His fingers twitched with a violent urge to throw the parchment into the fire. He had a sudden, desperate need to cross the room, pull her into his arms, and confess that she was the only thing keeping the massive manor from collapsing into dust. He needed to tell her he loved her. But he couldn't. He was Draco Malfoy. He was a wealthy, damaged widower. He was broken. And she was Hermione Granger, the absolute brightest witch of her age, who had a brilliant career and a vibrant life entirely outside these dark stone walls. He would not trap her here just because he was terrified of the quiet. You are a contracted professional, Draco said softly. He didn't blink. He didn't flinch. And the contract has expired. Hermione's jaw tightened. She didn't argue. She didn't push. She didn't try to aggressively break down his walls like she usually did. Fine. She whispered. She simply reached out and took the parchment from his hand. Her fingers didn't brush against his. She pulled a simple black quill from her briefcase and signed her name aggressively next to his. Her handwriting was sharp and angry. I will forward the final assessment report to the Department of Family Affairs by Friday, Hermione said. Her voice was completely, utterly hollow. I strongly recommend continuing Scorpius's puzzle therapy. He responds very well to spatial logic. I will see to it. Draco replied mechanically. Hermione closed her briefcase. The heavy brass latches clicked shut with a harsh, horribly final sound. She didn't look at him again. She didn't look at the heavy leather chairs where they had sat for hours. She didn't look at the false bottom drawer where Astoria's letters were still safely hidden. She walked directly to the flue. She threw a handful of green powder violently into the grate. Ministry of Magic, Atrium. She said clearly. She stepped into the flames. She didn't look back. The flue flared green. She was gone. Draco stood completely alone in the center of the study. The bright midday sun was still flooding the room, illuminating every single empty, desolate corner. He slowly lowered his hand. He looked at the spot where she had been standing mere seconds before. The manor was quiet again. It was a completely different, infinitely worse kind of quiet. Part 6. The third castle, Hermione Granger's office, was specifically designed to be a sanctuary. It was located on the quiet fourth floor of the Ministry of Magic, far away from the chaotic main atrium. It was small, painted a cheerful, pale yellow, and absolutely packed with towering stacks of official parchment. It smelled strongly like Earl Grey tea, dried lavender, and fresh ink. She sat at her small, deeply cluttered desk. A heavy file detailing a highly complex, aggressive custody dispute in Godric's Hollow lay open in front of her. She had been staring at the exact same paragraph for 20 solid minutes. She hadn't processed a single word of the legal text. She felt completely hollowed out, as if someone had taken a very precise magical blade and carefully carved out the entire center of her chest, leaving nothing but a cold draft behind. She had severely compromised her professionalism by falling entirely, recklessly, and hopelessly in love with Draco Malfoy. And he had looked at her with perfectly blank, aristocratic eyes and handed her a standard termination form. She aggressively rubbed her temples. A dull, throbbing headache had started the exact moment she stepped out of his flue on Thursday afternoon, and it hadn't stopped pounding since. He doesn't want you. She whispered out loud to the empty room. She desperately needed to accept the harsh reality of the situation. Malfoy didn't want you. He had systematically rebuilt his thick, impenetrable walls of pure-blood formality, and he had permanently locked her on the outside. She couldn't magically fix a man who aggressively refused to be fixed. She couldn't force a man to let her in if he preferred the dark. She picked up her standard ministry quill and pulled a fresh, crisp sheet of parchment from the stack. She needed to write a formal transfer recommendation for a different, younger mediator. She needed to focus intensely on her actual job. The small, stone fireplace in the corner of her office suddenly roared. The sound was shockingly violent. It wasn't the polite, measured crackle of a scheduled ministry flue connection. It was a massive, sudden, completely unregulated surge of magical energy. Green flames shot aggressively out of the small grate, illuminating the yellow walls in a harsh emerald glare. Hermione dropped her quill. She stood up so fast her wooden chair scraped loudly against the stone floor, almost tipping over. She reached instinctively for her wand, her heart hammering a rapid, panicked rhythm against her ribs. It was Draco. He didn't look anything like the untouchable pureblood who had coldly dismissed her 3 days ago. He looked completely, utterly wrecked. He wasn't wearing a tailored suit, but rather dark trousers and a wrinkled grey shirt, completely unbuttoned at the collar. His pale blonde hair was an absolute mess, and his chest was heaving with heavy, ragged breaths. He looked frantically around the small, cluttered office until his silver eyes locked intensely onto hers. "Malfoy," Hermione breathed. The name slipped out before she could stop it. "What are you doing here? How did you bypass the security wards on this floor?" "I bought the building supervisor," Draco said roughly. His voice was a harsh, desperate rasp that tore through the quiet room. He didn't wait for permission. He crossed the small office in 3 long, frantic strides. He stopped right in front of her desk. He placed both of his large, pale hands flat on the cluttered wood, leaning his entire weight heavily into it. "He packed a bag," Draco said. The words came out incredibly fast. "Broken." Hermione froze. The simmering anger she had been carefully nurturing for 3 days instantly vanished, completely replaced by a spike of cold dread. "Scorpius?" Draco nodded sharply. His chest was still heaving. "I woke up this morning. His heavy oak door was unlocked. I went inside and the bed was completely empty. He had packed his small green rucksack. Where did he go?" Hermione demanded, her voice sharp with sudden, intense fear. She stepped quickly around the desk, closing the physical distance between them. "He didn't make it past the outer wrought iron gates," Draco said, his voice cracking violently on the very last word. "The manor wards alerted me immediately. I found him walking down the long gravel driveway in the pouring rain. He was in his pajamas. He was trying to walk to London." Hermione covered her mouth with her hand. A small, sharp gasp escaped her lips. "He was trying to find you." Draco confessed into the small, quiet space between them. The heavy words hit Hermione with brutal physical force. She slowly lowered her hand. She looked closely at the man standing in front of her. He was trembling. Draco Malfoy, the man who prided himself on absolute, unwavering control, the man who could effortlessly shut down a room with a single cold glance, was physically shaking in her office. "Where is he now?" Hermione asked softly, her voice dropping to a gentle whisper. "He is asleep," Draco answered, swallowing hard, his throat working visibly. "I carried him back and put him in his bed. I sat in the chair in the dark corner until he finally fell asleep. Mippy is sitting directly outside his door. She won't let him move a single inch." Hermione let out a long, highly shaky breath. "He was trying to find me. He hasn't spoken a single word since you left." Draco pushed himself slowly off the desk. He stood up straight, but the arrogant, aristocratic posture was completely gone. He just looked exhausted, profoundly defeated. "He won't look at me. He completely refuses to eat. He just packed a bag and tried to walk 50 miles in the rain." "Because you pushed me away," Hermione said quietly. It wasn't an aggressive accusation. It was just the painful, undeniable truth. "Because I pushed you away." Draco agreed immediately. He didn't fight her. He didn't raise his defensive shields. He took a slow step closer to her. "I read the letter," Draco said softly. Hermione frowned in deep confusion. "What letter?" "I didn't send you a letter. Astoria's last letter," Draco corrected. He reached into the pocket of his wrinkled trousers. He pulled out a piece of thick, folded parchment. It was carefully tied with a dark green ribbon. It was the exact letter Hermione had seen him reading that very first night in the dark study. He held it out to her. Hermione hesitated. She didn't want to read a dead woman's highly private words. "Malfoy, I really shouldn't read it," he pleaded. The absolute, raw desperation in his voice completely broke her resistance. Hermione took the parchment. She gently untied the green ribbon. She unfolded the crisp paper. Astoria's elegant, perfectly formed handwriting filled the page. "If I leave you two alone, you will build separate castles in the same house and never speak. I hired someone. You need a mediator. Someone who won't be scared of you. Someone who knows exactly how to handle a stubborn Malfoy." Hermione rapidly read the words. She read the final, heartbreaking plea. "Let her in, Draco. For Scorpius." She slowly lowered the letter. "She knew," Draco said quietly. He was watching her face with intense, entirely unguarded focus. "She knew exactly what I was going to do. She knew I was going to build a massive, impenetrable castle of grief and completely lock myself inside it. She knew I was going to shut Scorpius out because I simply didn't know how to survive the quiet. And she hired me to aggressively break the ice," Hermione whispered, recalling the very first conversation in her London office. "She hired you to break the castle." Draco corrected gently. He took another step closer. The small space between them was practically vibrating with energy. The air was thick, heavily charged with a sudden, overwhelming heat that hadn't been present since the thunderstorm in the library. "I was doing it again, Granger," Draco confessed, his voice dropping to a rough, deeply intimate whisper. "On Thursday, when I coldly handed you that termination form, I was terrified. I was terrified of how much space you actively take up in my life. I was terrified of how much Scorpius loves you. I was terrified of how much I desperately wanted to ask you to stay." Hermione's heart hammered painfully against her ribs. She didn't speak. She couldn't form a single word. "So I built a third castle," Draco continued, his silver eyes locked fiercely onto hers. "I built a thick wall out of pure-blood formality and professional boundaries, and I locked myself securely inside it. I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was protecting myself. You were protecting a ghost," Hermione said softly. "I was protecting a massive coward," Draco corrected firmly. He reached out. He didn't hesitate this time. He didn't pull back in panic. He gently wrapped his large, pale fingers around her wrist. His touch was incredibly, vividly warm. The sudden physical contact sent a sharp shock of electricity straight up her arm. Hermione gasped softly, her brown eyes going wide. Draco didn't let go. He stepped directly into her personal space. He was towering over her in the small yellow office. "Scorpius tried to walk to London because he is significantly braver than I am," Draco whispered, his face hovering mere inches from hers. He knew exactly what he wanted, and he was completely willing to walk 50 miles in the rain to get it. He slowly slid his hand up her arm. He rested his warm palm against her shoulder, his long fingers lightly brushing the side of her neck. The heat radiating from his direct touch was entirely overwhelming. Hermione leaned slightly into his hand, a completely involuntary, desperate response to his proximity. "I don't want to build castles anymore, Hermione," Draco said. His voice was a dark, desperate velvet. It was the very first time he had ever used her given name. The sound of it on his lips sent a violent shiver directly down her spine. "I don't want to hide in the dark," he continued, his thumb gently tracing the sharp line of her jaw. "I don't want to be a ghost in my own house. I want the noise back. I want the light back." He looked deeply down at her. All the Malfoy arrogance was completely gone. He was entirely bare. "Astoria hired you for exactly 6 months. Draco whispered into the highly charged air between them. "I'm asking for the rest of my life." Hermione stopped breathing. The heavy words hung securely in the small office. They were massive. They were terrifying. They were exactly what she had been hopelessly wishing for in the dark. She looked up into his silver eyes, seeing the absolute terror firmly lodged there. She saw the roar, devastating hope. He had completely dismantled every single one of his defensive walls, handing her the fragile pieces. She drops the quill. She doesn't say a single word. She just walks around the desk and closes the distance. Part 7. The choice the Flu Network spit them out into the drawing room. Green fire flared. Ash scattered across the marble hearth. The oppressive, familiar chill of Malfoy Manor rushed up to meet them. Draco stepped out first. He turned. He caught Hermione by the elbow as she stumbled over the heavy iron grate. Her maroon jumper held soot. Her wild curls were an absolute mess. She stood in the grand, formal drawing room. She looked entirely out of place among the dark tapestries and the imposing portraits. He kept his hold on her arm. He liked the solid reality of her standing there. "You need to fix your wards, Malfoy," she said. She brushed Ash off her sleeve with her free hand. "The ministry connection is far too rough." "I prefer it that way," Draco replied. His tone remained clipped. "It deters the bureaucrats. It ruins a good jumper. I will buy you 10 new ones." She stopped brushing her sleeve. She looked up. Her brown eyes met his. Draco held her look. He didn't retreat. He felt grounded. The panic had burned away in her yellow office. The terror of letting someone in was gone, replaced by a fierce, undeniable need to keep her exactly where she was. "You mean that," she noted. "I never joke about knitwear, Granger. The situation is dire." She let out a short laugh. The sound bounced off the high ceilings. The portraits on the walls seemed to listen. The manor didn't feel heavy right now. It felt awake. It felt like a place where people lived, instead of a museum for ghosts. Draco shifted his grip. He slid his hand down her arm. He laced his fingers through hers. Her skin was warm. She looked at their joined hands. She didn't pull away. Her thumb brushed the silver edge of his signet ring. "We need to check on Scorpius," Hermione said. "Yes." They walked out of the drawing room. They moved down the long hallway. The stone floor echoed with their footsteps. The dark wood paneling seemed less imposing. The shadows didn't bother him. Draco kept her hand in his. He refused to let go. He needed the physical anchor. Every step they took deeper into the manor felt like a victory. He was walking back into his life. He was bringing the light with him. He packed his green rucksack, Draco told her. They climbed the grand staircase. He took the wooden puzzle you brought him. The one with the painted stars. He took the puzzle. He likes the stars. He likes you sitting with him while he works on the stars. He prefers you. He needs us both. Draco stopped on the landing. He turned to face her. The words hung in the air. Us both. It wasn't a professional assessment. It was a promise. He rubbed his silver signet ring with his thumb. The metal felt warm. I'm holding you to that. Draco stated. The contract is over. You are here on your own time. I am aware of my schedule, Malfoy. Good. They reached the second floor. The West Wing corridor stretched out before them. The heavy portraits of his ancestors watched them pass. Draco didn't care. He walked with purpose. Mippy stood outside the heavy oak door. The house elf wore a pristine white pillowcase. She held a silver tray with a glass of water. Her large ears drooped slightly, a sign of her immense worry. Master Malfoy, Mippy squeaked. She bowed low. She looked at Hermione. Her ears twitched upwards. The Miss Granger returned. I did, Mippy, Hermione said. Is he awake? Draco asked. The young master is quiet. He does not sleep. He looks at the window. Draco felt a sharp ache in his ribs. He pushed the door open. The room was dim. The heavy curtains blocked the moonlight. A single enchanted glass sphere glowed on the bedside table, casting a soft, blue light over the floor. Scorpius sat in the middle of the large bed. He wore his dark green pajamas. The small rucksack sat on the floor near the door, a painful reminder of his desperate bravery. He stared at the window. He didn't turn his head when the door opened. Draco stepped into the room. He brought Hermione with him. Scorpius. Draco said. The boy flinched. He pulled his knees up to his chest. He kept his face turned away. The rejection stung, but Draco didn't retreat. He didn't build a wall. He walked forward. Draco stopped beside the bed. Hermione stood right next to him. Their hands were still joined. I brought her back, Draco said. His voice was firm. Direct. Scorpius froze. He turned his head. He looked at Draco. Then he looked at Hermione. His grey eyes tracked down. He saw Draco's large, pale hand holding Hermione's smaller one. Scorpius let go of his knees. He sat up straight. He didn't speak. He reached out. Hermione stepped forward. She let go of Draco's hand. She sat on the edge of the mattress. You tried to walk to London, Hermione said. Her tone was factual. No pity. No scolding. It was the exact tone she always used, treating him like an equal instead of a fragile porcelain doll. Scorpius gave a tiny nod. That is a long walk in the rain. Another nod. Your father came to get me. Scorpius looked at Draco. The boy's face searched his father's expression. He was looking for the distance. He was looking for the icy, formal wall that Draco usually hid behind. Draco sat down on the other side of the bed. The mattress dipped under his weight. He didn't hover in the doorway. He didn't stand near the wall. He occupied the space directly next to his son. I was wrong, Draco told his son. He kept his words simple. Clear. He didn't offer a complicated, pure-blood apology. I thought she needed to leave. I made a mistake. Scorpius tilted his head. I asked her to stay, Draco continued. She agreed. Scorpius looked back at Hermione. He reached for her sleeve. He tugged the maroon wool. Stay. Scorpius whispered. His voice was raspy from misuse. I plan to. Hermione answered. Scorpius looked down at the blankets. The tense, rigid line of his shoulders dropped. He looked up again. He smiled. It wasn't a hesitant twitch of the lips. It was a genuine, bright smile. It transformed his entire face. The heavy shadows vanished. He looked like a normal boy. He looked like Astoria for just a fleeting second, before he looked entirely like himself again. Draco swallowed hard. The sight hit him with immense force. He had failed to produce that expression for an entire year. Hermione had done it in 2 minutes. He didn't feel jealous. He felt a deep, anchoring relief. Scorpius crawled across the mattress. He climbed directly into Draco's lap. Draco wrapped his arms around his son. He held the boy tight. Scorpius buried his face in Draco's chest, his small hands fisting the fabric of Draco's wrinkled shirt. Hermione watched them. She reached out and rested her hand on Draco's knee. Draco covered her hand with his own. They sat there in the quiet room. The silence wasn't oppressive. It was warm. It felt complete. Scorpius closed his eyes. The rhythmic breathing signaled sleep within minutes. The intense exhaustion of his failed escape attempt finally took over. Draco shifted. He laid Scorpius down on the pillows. He pulled the thick, green quilt over the boy's shoulders. He stood up. He looked at Hermione. Let's go downstairs. Draco murmured. She nodded. They walked to the library. The storm from weeks ago was a memory. The large arched windows showed a clear night sky. Stars dotted the black canvas outside. Draco walked to the ornate drink cabinet. He poured 2 fingers of Ogden's fire whiskey into a crystal tumbler. He poured a second glass. He handed it to Hermione. She took it. I usually prefer tea. You need a strong drink, Granger. You committed to dealing with 2 Malfoys. She took a sip. She coughed at the burn. She walked to the leather sofa and sat down. Draco didn't sit in the armchair across from her. He sat on the sofa. He sat close. Their knees brushed. Hermione traced the rim of the crystal glass with her thumb. She looked at the fireplace. The flames were orange and steady. He smiled. Hermione noted. He did. You look different. Different how? You look awake. Draco took a drink. The fire whiskey burned a fiery trail down his throat. He set the glass on the mahogany table. I spent a year pretending I was fine in the dark. Draco said. His sentences remained short. The truth didn't need long explanations. I thought it was the only way to function. You proved me wrong. You did the work, Malfoy. You forced me to do the work. I am a professional. You were a professional. The contract expired at noon today. Hermione set her glass next to his. The crystal clinked against the wood. Then what am I now? Draco turned to her. He rested his arm on the back of the sofa. His fingers brushed the wild curls at the nape of her neck. You are the reason this house feels like a home. Hermione exhaled a shaky breath. She leaned into his touch. I didn't think you would come to the ministry, she admitted. I thought you would lock the gates. I thought you would retreat behind the third castle. I tried. Draco moved his hand. He traced the sharp line of her jaw. His skin met hers. I failed. I'm glad you failed. I am out of practice, Granger. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Be normal. Be someone who doesn't ruin things. You are not ruining anything. She turned her head. Her lips brushed his palm. We will figure it out. Tuesday and Thursday sessions are cancelled. We can start with dinner on Friday. I will take you to dinner tomorrow. I have to work tomorrow. I will buy the restaurant. You can eat while you work. She laughed. The sound settled deep in his chest, chasing away the last remnants of the cold. You are ridiculous. I am wealthy. There is a distinction. She shook her head. She reached up. She placed her hands on his shoulders. Draco didn't wait. He leaned in. He pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was firm. Decisive. It carried every unsaid word of the last 6 months. It held the frustration, the bitter arguments, the quiet moments over wooden puzzles, and the desperate sprint through the ministry wards. It was an apology and a promise rolled into one. Her hands tangled in his shirt collar. She pulled him closer. Draco let out a long breath against her mouth. The heavy knot in his chest dissolved. The lingering cold vanished entirely. He pulled back an inch. He rested his forehead against hers. Stay, Draco instructed. It wasn't a question. I am right here, Hermione answered. He kissed her again. The manor was quiet around them. It was a good quiet. The empty spaces were gone. The ghosts were resting. He was home. The end.